I think that a fear factor that a lot of people have is that the blood work's basically saying, could there be a monster under the bed? When people have hypothyroidism, they're often very sensitive to caffeine because they clear the caffeine slower. And now it creates this dichotomy situation because people with hypothyroidism have low energy, so they tend to self-medicate with caffeine, then they get more side effects from the caffeine, and it's either going, do I want to be anxious or tired?
So for guys like me, we're also in this stage now. Now we're at the optimizing the last 1 or 2%.
Yeah.
So it got me thinking, where do I look now?
Yeah.
I don't have any issues. My blood work doesn't have any issues, bro. In fact, it improves as the years go on. I can only find one thing, but I find this with everyone that I've found, depending on how you look at it. So when I asked you this question, I asked you this about a year ago, but I want to see if your opinion has changed. So you talked about dyslipidemia when the dose of testosterone goes up. And for my friends that are using higher doses of testosterone and anabolics, that's everyone. I'm talking high ApoB, high LDL, and low HDL. It's almost like this proxy for you're on the gear, bro.
Yep.
Don't lie to me. It's very easy, right? And that happens to me even on TRT. It's not the HDL though, but the ApoB. Now mine's not considered high. It's in the range. It's at the high end of the normal range. It's 100 or 1, depending on the units of measure. Some cardiologists will say, you're fine, you're in range, but then you've got the Peter Attias or Dr. Andrew Wingy, where they'll say that based on what they see with Andrew Wingy in the emergency room and what Peter Attias sees in his papers and his patients is too high to be optimal. They like to see it less than 50. Now, I've tried dietary changes and my lifestyle couldn't really get any better aside from me being less weight, which I've done as well. And it's always stayed there. It's barely moved from 80 to 100. What do you think about artificially lowering ApoB less than 50? Where do you stand in this whole debate? Because it's hot topic right now, right?
It is, and it's become a hot topic in the recent years, and previously it wasn't even a topic of discussion, really. I mean, maybe it was, but I wasn't privy to it. I try not to have opinions on things that I'm not 100% on. So everything I'm going to say about this topic is coming from a perspective that is, I would consider, relatively uninformed. I'm not a cardiologist. I don't have any interest. I don't have any interest in cardiology beyond it being peripheral, but still involved in what I do. So when I get people come to me for coaching with a bunch of like advanced cardiology questions and they want to know everything about their lipids, I'm like, it's not for me. I can't answer this. So the way that I look at it, and I'm very open to being educated on this, but I'm never going to become an expert on it because you can only be an expert on so many things. So I'm really trying not to be a jack of all trades, master of none. And I also don't advocate the use of high doses of steroids, period. So it's not a something that I think that I need to be as privy to. But my general opinion on it is that as far as I'm aware, the reason that people would be measuring ApoB, and this is a very rudimentary statement, is that they're measuring their risk of dying from cardiovascular disease. That's what we're all, that's the end game. People don't want to die from having a heart attack. And I think that's a fair thing. You know, if you don't want to die, I think that should be everyone's priority. And the better you're doing in life, the more of a concern you have about dying. And that's the thing that's interesting that I've observed is that the more you have to lose, the more you don't want to lose it. So it can become a very difficult point of anxiety for a lot of guys where they didn't take care of themselves well when they were younger, and then they've built something now that they want to stick around for, and they go, "What? Maybe I've screwed this up, and I've prematurely taken 10 or 20 or 30 years off my life." And that's why I'm constantly advising these younger guys to go, your future self probably wouldn't advise you to do a cycle of 2 grams of gear at the moment for the sake of gaining a bit of extra muscle in a short space of time because of the potential ramifications in the future. The risk to reward ratio is not going to be worth it in hindsight. So when it comes to ApoB, and maybe this is just, again, my biases, but I'm aware of my biases, is that I am much more interested in saying, go get a comprehensive cardiovascular scan if you want to see what's going on with your heart. Because the problem with blood work is that blood work fluctuates every day you get it. It fluctuates every hour that you get it. It fluctuates based on a whole bunch of other factors as well. Now, if you're measuring your bloods for like a gene or something like that, of course, it's not going to fluctuate. But anything to do with lipids, including ApoB, will be subject to at least some degree of fluctuation. The problem that we have with lipids, and this is the big thing around LDL, is there's a big genetic component to it, massive. And that's why so much of the data on LDL is contradictory. And it's also because there are other variables that play into LDL. So if you've got one guy who's got a genetically high LDL and lives a perfect diet and lifestyle, and another guy who's got a genetically low LDL but lives like trash, and they've got the same LDL levels, they don't have the same risk of cardiovascular disease. And that's a very oversimplified statement for why this issue is so contentious, because people are looking myopically at one variable in a series of interconnected systems. And you're also looking at data that I think is relatively rudimentary, because the scan of the arteries overrules the blood work, because the blood work is just basically saying to me, and this is where I always refer people out to specialists. I go, look, this is above my pay grade. This is above my expertise. So this is my coaching. Go and get the scan from your doctor, and then go see this person who can interpret the results. But don't fret over what the blood work could or couldn't mean. Get the scan done, and then we actually know what that blood work means. And I think that a fear factor that a lot of people have is that the blood work's basically saying, could there be a monster under the bed? And the more the blood work goes in X direction, the more of a chance there is that there's a monster under the bed. I think some people just want to tell themselves there's not a monster under the bed because they don't want to look. Because if they look, they might be going, okay, well, that monster's going to fuck me up, or I can't get rid of that monster. If there is a monster there, that's not a monster I can beat. Sometimes it's important to check under the bed because that is a monster that we can beat. Things like liver disease, for example, unless you've progressed to late stage cirrhosis, a lot of stuff is treatable or at least manageable, if not reversible. So it's like we want to see that monster before he gets too big, because if he gets too big and you leave it too long, you're fucked. So when it comes to the ApoB stuff, my understanding of cardiology is that cardiovascular disease will only occur if there is stimulus that will inflame the arterial lining. And generally, the stimulus that will inflame the arterial lining for most people is related to drugs, alcohol, not doing enough exercise. And there's a trifecta there, because we've got healthy and unhealthy user bias. So people who don't care about, let's say, smoking a pack of cigarettes a day probably aren't also very diligent with their diet, and also aren't very diligent with their exercise. So then you get compounding factors, and then you basically just have multiple fires that you're pouring gasoline on, then they get together and become a big fire, and you get a big problem. So when I look at things like ApoB is impacted by a bunch of factors, but it's also got a genetic set point. So if someone's got genetically different variable numbers for their where their lipids sit by default, my general approach with it is, if you optimize all the factors for diet and lifestyle and not developing cardiovascular disease, which the most common root cause, because people who are health conscious are not generally smoking and drinking a bunch, is insulin resistance. Is that if you have a healthy metabolic function and you're not poisoning your body every day, you don't have the stimulus to start that fire. And to me, ApoB is saying, if that fire starts, it's going to be a big fire. So it's kind of like we use the example a lot that, like, we've all met or heard of someone, at least, maybe not met, but heard of someone who, their grandparent smoked a pack of cigarettes a day and drank 6 beers a night and lived till 100 and died peacefully in their sleep. That's an exception to the rule. That doesn't disprove anything. Exceptions always exist. But if we're looking at someone who, and this is where I think the long-winded answer to ApoB is if someone's got high ApoB, they're not going to be the exception to the rule. They're going to be someone who's going to more likely pay the consequences of that poor diet and lifestyle decision. So for me, looking at pragmatic health coaching rather than diagnosing and treating cardiovascular disease, because it's a different department, I'm going, focus on the variables that you can control. And if you want to investigate it further, get the best quality scan that you can get that's going to pick up the soft plaque, that's going to give you all this information. And then if the blood work's showing, okay, well, your ApoB is high, so that means, according to this study, that means you're going to develop this, but you're going, but I don't have this. It's not there. I've checked. It's not there. And I think sometimes people use blood work in placement of a scan. Blood work just says, do I need to scan this? It doesn't say anything more than that to me. Now, if someone comes in and their triglycerides are 5 times elevated above the reference range, yeah, you should scan it, but I could tell you the scan's not going to be good. That kind of stuff's obvious. But when it comes to these more kind of nuanced, low-risk optimization stuff, I'm sitting here being like, if someone's got high ApoB, and again, not medical advice, not my expertise, but if someone's got higher suboptimal ApoB, but all their metabolic parameters are optimal, they're not doing any of the stuff that would lead to cardiovascular disease, and they've got a clear artery scan, I'd be sitting here being like, the anxiety about heart disease is probably the biggest problem.
Overwhelmed and confused. There's a lot of new territory to cover, and there is a lot of conflicting information. I wrote TRT 101 so that you can have everything that you need to know in an instruction manual in one place that you can refer back to, that you can have all the questions answered before they even come up. TRT 101 is my best practice approach for TRT from start to finish, and it contains everything that you need to avoid all the challenges and pitfalls that I've seen come up in my clients over the last 5 years. You can check it out via the link below.
Yeah, that's a good answer. And that's where I'm at. So obviously I'm not on any statins or PCSK9s. I did learn recently from Dr. Andrew Wingy, even the scan with the contrast can also not show everything, because apparently the plaque can be building from behind.
Yep.
But these inaccuracies, I think it's like 10% or less. So there's a 90% chance if you don't see any soft plaque there, you don't have any. And apparently with a CAC, which is just a scan, I had that, I got a score of 0. Even that's 85% accurate.
Yeah.
So I guess I'm here waiting for more info to come out. That's the stage I'm at, because I'm not entirely convinced on either side. And I know Dave Feldman and Paul Saladino, they're running that study for people with high LDL, much higher than me, like 3 times the reference range, for these lean mass hyper responders. And I think it's like a few years in now, and they haven't built any extra plaque.
Yep.
But it's obviously early days, because this thing is something that happens over decades.
Yeah.
But I'm caught in this kind of place where that Derek Moore Plates, he goes, yeah, I get that side. Why not just take a statin or a PCSK9 just to get rid of it anyway? Don't have to think about it. But then people like me, which leads me to my next question. I'm one of these people because I was diagnosed with an autoimmune disorder, which I don't have anymore. You don't really have them until you're doing something to make them flare up. I have thyroid antibodies. They go like 1,000x when I'm doing something wrong. Can be a variety of things, usually diet. Don't have it now, but when I take medications, I get flares, usually digestive, skin problems. And so the reason I don't take medications that I'd love to potentially take, whether it's a statin or a GLP or something to lose weight, is because I'm always that guy that gets the side effects. And not being a hypochondriac, like I'm that guy.
Yeah.
Do you have clients like that even though there are certain medications that could be useful for them, maybe it's, I don't know, even fish oil or metformin, they're just so sensitive to these meds or supplements from like a digestive or autoimmune standpoint? Do you have clients like this?
Yeah. So I can't diagnose anything, obviously, but when it comes to these kind of issues, you see a lot of patterns come up, because one of the blessings I've had in my career kind of taking off in this space is that I tend to get more troubleshooting cases. And I like that because they're more difficult, they're more challenging. I tend to get people coming to me when they're like, I've seen everyone, I've seen all these people, no one can solve this, but I thought I'd just run it by you, and then we tend to get to the bottom of it. And that I really enjoy that, because that's where you learn a lot. But you definitely see patterns, because people think they're unique, that people aren't unique. They may be in a small bucket, but they're in a bucket. So when it comes to people getting side effects from medication, so I think, and again, I'm biased, but I've chosen my biases. I'm from an optimization standpoint, so from a healthy individual standpoint, if people are sick and they need medications, and they need to go to a medical doctor, and that's a entirely different discussion. But from a health optimization standpoint, I think that health should be optimized, and I don't have anything bad to say about anyone, and I will never do that professionally, but I'm not I'm neutral towards the work of Gary Brecker. Not a huge fan of a lot of people's work, but one thing that he really correctly says is that the most important thing for human health is amino acids, essential fatty acids, vitamins, minerals, phytonutrients, so nutrients for the human body. A long time ago, they made a list of all the essential nutrients for the human body, and it's not all of them, but they basically put this umbrella term around, again, all the amino acids, omega-3, 6, and 9, all the vitamins, minerals we've identified, and then phytonutrients and flavonoids. And there's this kind of big list. I don't know what the number is, but it's deemed like all the essential nutrients to the human body. I think, and this is just my approach that underlies a lot of what I do, is that human health should be able to be optimized, assuming someone is healthy and wants to maintain health, by maintaining good diet and lifestyle practices, optimizing their intake of all the essential nutrients the body needs to do what it does. And also in this day and age, and this is my take on this in terms of my biases, sometimes that also involves the need to optimize hormone production, because I think that there's a lot of stuff in the environment that's unavoidable. We were talking about air quality here before. These things are not avoidable. I mean, unless you go and live on a tropical island somewhere, then maybe. But that's how I look at it. So I like things that are bioidentical or essential to the human body, and then focusing on what we do and what we take. So I think that all medications cause side effects, and you can't really hide from that. So for example, people often talk about tadalafil, and I don't want to freak anyone out about not taking tadalafil. Tadalafil absolutely has its place. It is massively beneficial, but systemically inhibiting PDE5 does stuff outside of your dick. Like it does other things. For example, it reduces clearance of cortisol. We don't fully understand the outcomes of that because no one's looked into it. So medications basically, when you take a medication and you're either increasing something or inhibiting something, which tends to be what these medications do, you create a favorable outcome in the department that you're hoping to improve. But you can also create issues in other departments because the body is this series of interconnected systems, which is what Paul Chek talks about. So in the case of someone who's sick, the pros outweigh the cons. Because if we're in a situation being like, well, this medication causes side effects, but if we don't treat the underlying issue, they're going to be dead, which is the ultimate problem. So if we can prevent death, then the side effects that it can cause or does cause are less problematic. And the biggest example of that, which I don't have any educated opinions on cancer, but chemotherapy is the best example of that. Will kill the cancer. Everything else that comes with it is not as bad as the death from the cancer, and people kind of debate that. Again, I have no stance on chemotherapy. So when it comes to medications, people need to accept that all medications will have some degree of unfavorable outcome. Now, when it comes to people who get side effects from all medications, so basically like cases like you, I use the example, like if something causes a side effect, you're going to get it. And it's not a placebo effect from reading the package insert or going on Dr. Google and creating that in yourself. It's a legitimate, everything that I create gives me a side effect. And I think that there can be two reasons for this. One is that some people are more self-aware. So we get, if you look at the studies in psychiatry, they say that SSRI antidepressants don't have any effect for 8 weeks. If I gave you 100 milligrams of Zoloft right now and we went out for dinner later, you'd probably go, I feel this, because absolutely it does. Because you're more subjectively aware of your baseline, because you're more aware of deviating from that baseline.
Definitely.
So some people are not self-aware when it comes to a lot of things, not just health, but actions, everything. So self-awareness can be a blessing and a curse. I would always look at it and frame this as a blessing because I don't see any reason why self-awareness is not a blessing.
Mm-hmm.
But if someone is getting side effects from all medications and supplements, to me, looking at how the body works, and we're assuming that they're objective side effects now, is that I think that is typically a result of reduced liver clearance of the medication. Because if you take a medication and you can't clear it as efficiently, it means it's going to have a stronger biological effect. So if someone's got hypothyroidism, which if you've had flares of periods where you've had thyroglobulin or antithyroid peroxidase or both elevated, that means that your immune system has attacked your thyroid. So I always use the Game of Thrones analogy for hypothyroidism. And if anyone hasn't seen Game of Thrones, it doesn't spoil it, but also everyone should have seen Game of Thrones, is that if we're looking at the last season, the iconic, very dark episode, the Battle of Winterfell, if you've got your Dothraki army out the front, which is your immune system, and you in this analogy are the castle, is it the castle of Winterfell, or are they attacking let's say it's the Battle of Winterfell. So I might be getting that wrong, but In this scenario, you want your Dothraki army to be ready to attack the White Walkers that are coming in. That's what they're there for. That's the ideal situation. And let's say in this analogy, the White Walkers are like, I don't know, pneumonia, contagious disease, like bacterial infections, everything that you want your immune system to defend you from. So if you've got an autoimmune condition, those Dothraki are attacking the castle. They've turned around and they're running at the castle and they're attacking the castle walls. Not ideal. Now, how much damage can the Dothraki do against the castle walls? You know, maybe not a huge amount, but over time, they could probably wear down the defenses. But the problem now is that if those White Walkers come in, not only are the Dothraki flanked because they're facing the wrong direction, they've already damaged the castle and they're already pretty gassed because they've constantly been attacking and attacking and attacking. So not only is your body already compromised, but your immune system is distracted and depleted. And this is why people with autoimmune conditions are typically considered immunocompromised. So the problem that we have, if this castle in this instance, or the part of the castle they're attacking is your thyroid, is that thyroid has become damaged. And even if you call the Dothraki off and you resolve whatever the physiological or circumstantial state that was causing the antibodies to flare up, they've done damage to the wall. And you can't go in and rebuild your thyroid. We don't know how to do that yet. Now, potentially bioregulated peptides could be the way to treat that. We don't really know. But if you're in a scenario like that, damage has been done to the thyroid. So the problem that we have here is that the thyroid is responsible for a lot of really internal, important biological functions, particularly the function of the liver. So when people have hypothyroidism, they're often very sensitive to caffeine because they clear the caffeine slower. And now it creates this, again, like this dichotomy situation because people with hypothyroidism have low energy. So they tend to self-medicate with caffeine, then they get more side effects from the caffeine. And it's either going, do I want to be anxious or tired? And they end up in this really tricky state. But in this situation, I would hypothesize, and again, I can't say for sure, but if the thyroid is suboptimal due to damage, even if you've called off the attack from the autoimmune system, it's still been damaged over the years, so it couldn't be functioning optimally, then that could be resulting in reduced liver clearance of these medications. Anecdotal outcomes as well really conflates bioidentical testosterone with anabolic steroids. Finding something productive and stressful that's got that nice balance that if you got out the other side of it, you'd be like, that would be meaningful. When I was going through my rehabilitation for my brain injury, if it wasn't for the testosterone, I wouldn't have gotten through it because that was just this insurmountable period of what I would call living hell.